Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to EarthShift Global's next webinar. And today we are so very pleased to have Shannon Theuts from Apeel Sciences with us today. Shannon Theuts is a sustainability analyst at Apeel Sciences in Goleta, California. She conducts lifecycle assessments to analyze environmental impact of Apeel's products across various produce types and customer supply chains. So without further ado, Shannon, please take it away.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much for the intro, Holly. As she said, my name is Shannon. I'm an analyst on the sustainability team at Apeel. I've been with Apeel for about a year now. I joined after graduating from the Master's of Environmental Management program at Duke, the Nicholas School of the Environment. I'm very excited to take a deep dive into life cycle assessment today, really share some of the results from Apeel's LCA, which we completed and we got third-party verified last fall, as well as discuss some of the more recent work we've done since then. However, before we get too much into the results, I want to take some time to introduce Apeel as a company. Some of you may be familiar with Apeel. You may have seen our website, read a news article, but I want to take a moment to just provide a little background of what exactly our product is, what does it mean to have a technology that can improve the shelf life of fresh produce, reduce food waste, as well as just a couple statistics that kind of set the scene for the food system that Apeel is introducing our product into. So really to kind of dive straight into some facts about our food system to set the scene for the problem that Apeel is trying to solve. WRI estimates that by 2050, we're going to need 56% more food to feed a growing population. But at the same time, we still waste a shocking amount of fresh produce. This statistic is particularly relevant for Apeel. Our product is optimized for fresh fruits and vegetables, and FAO estimates that 45% of fresh fruits and vegetables grown globally go to waste. And all of that food waste does come at a cost. 8% of greenhouse gas emissions are estimated to be caused by food waste. Not only is there a real sustainability cost, there's some issues with the longevity of a system that operates in this way. There's also a significant economic cost to food waste. The FAO estimates that the cost of food waste every single year is $2.6 trillion. That's a significant amount of money that's just going to waste every year. So while this is, these statistics are quite daunting, they really present some systemic issues that are caused within the global food system. Apeel chooses to see this as a real opportunity to address some of these pervasive sustainability issues, as well as try and capitalize on the financial value that could be created by tackling this issue. But really what sets Apeel apart is that we wanted to take a slightly different approach than others before in looking to nature for solutions. The planet has been getting along just fine without us for the past couple billion years. So what can we learn from the molecules, processes, structures in place out in nature to really address these pervasive issues within our food system? So Apeel was founded with the mission you see written here, with the idea that we want to work with nature to improve access to quality, reduce food waste, and really ensure an abundant future for the planet. So this is the lens through which Apeel views the world, and it informs how we approach creating innovative solutions to address systemic issues in our food system. So just to dig a little bit more into what that looks like today, for the shelf life extension technology, which is really going to be at the center of the LCA results that we go through today, it means looking at the systems that fruits and vegetables already have in place to protect themselves and really harnessing that. So in a nutshell, it's exactly what you see here. Apeel uses food to protect food. Our plant-derived product is composed of the materials that already exist in all of the fruits and vegetables we eat. Interestingly enough, every plant on Earth has developed a sort of skin on its surface that protects it from the elements. That's shown here as this cuticle layer, the idea that on the outsides of fruits and vegetables and plants, they have this barrier that helps protect them from the outside world. And I think we can see this in action in that intuitively, you can really see that peel on something like a lemon. If you set a lemon on the counter and then a strawberry right next to it where that layer is much thinner, the lemon is much more robust, it's gonna last a lot longer. So this is kind of what inspired the idea of Apeel. What if we could create a little extra peel on the outside of produce that doesn't have quite so robust a layer? And the idea that if we can mimic that molecular structure that's on the outside of fresh fruits and vegetables already, using materials that are already found in every bite of fruit and vegetable that we eat, we could enable a real shelf life extension for fresh fruits and vegetables that tend to spoil relatively quickly. So the Apeel product shows up on produce as an invisible, edible little extra peel that helps maintain quality and slow the spoilage of fruits and vegetables. So how exactly does this work? Essentially, interestingly enough, every piece of produce that's in your home, in your refrigerators that you buy from the store is a living, breathing organism. It's taking in oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide and moisture to satisfy all the little processes still going on at a molecular level. And in turn, bringing in that oxygen and releasing the water is actually what slowly drives the spoilage of produce over time. So Apeel works by creating this perfect little microclimate within the fruit and vegetable, where it regulates that exchange of oxygen and the loss of water, and helps the fruit breathe just enough to get to a stage of ripeness, but helps it breathe a little slower so that that shelf life is longer and lasts longer as it travels through the supply chain. On this next slide, we're going to see a couple time-lapse videos of the Apeel product in action. Our first product in market was an avocado. I think we've all bought a hard green avocado from the store to have it be unripe for a long time, then ripe for only a short amount of time before it goes bad. Apeel is able to extend that ready-to-eat phase. Here we see it in action on asparagus, which has a very short shelf life, so much so that it tends to be air freighted into US and European markets. Apeel is able to extend the shelf life long enough to ship asparagus via sea freight, which has exciting carbon emission reduction implications. Even for something like a lemon, which has that robust peel, citrus fruits can lose moisture relatively easily, so Apeel can even extend the shelf life of something that lasts a while, like a lemon. Taking a look now at limes. Limes tend to go to waste in the retail when they turn into this yellow color that isn't very appealing for the consumer. Apeel is able to maintain that green color freshness on the shelf for longer. Another citrus fruit, here we see these easy peel mandarins, which again, like other citrus fruits, tend to still lose moisture even though they have the peel. So Apeel is able to help retain moisture inside the fruit, extend the shelf life, reducing waste. With cucumbers, there's an exciting potential here to reduce reliance on single-use plastics. Apeel is able to perform just as effectively as that plastic in extending the shelf life of cucumbers at retail. And with apples, an exciting potential here with our product that's approved for use on organic fruit. Organic farmers don't tend to have the same tools in their arsenal to help keep produce fresh as it moves along the supply chain. We're helping organic farmers really be able to get their produce to market. The interesting thing you'll see here with strawberries, if strawberries lose about 6 to 7% of their moisture, these little itty bitty cracks open up on the surface that serve as a way for things like mold to get onto the surface of the fruit. So even though Apeel is not directly antifungal, anti-mold, we help maintain the moisture such that the mold can't infect the fruit in the first place. And then lastly here, kind of ending with some blueberries that slowly turn to raisins without Apeel, but then still some nice fresh plump blueberries on the right. I love watching those time-lapse videos. It's always exciting to see our product in action. And the exciting potential that I hope this gives you a sense for is just the Apeel product helps create more time with a piece of produce. And that is able to drive value all along the produce supply chain, not just at the retailer, not just at the consumer, but the producer is maybe able to pick his fruit closer to when it's optimally ripe, best tasting, since it lasts longer in that ripe stage. Or in addition, things like citrus fruit, which will lose their moisture, producers will overpack the box that they send to a retailer, sending essentially more than they're getting paid for in order to account for the fact that some of that moisture is going to be lost along the supply chain. So we can help producers maintain moisture as their produce is shipped, helping them see greater financial returns. Alluding to that, asparagus product distributors it's a pretty significant cost if they need to ship asparagus via air freight, as well as significant carbon emissions result from that form of transportation. So if we can help shift different types of produce from more expensive, more carbon intensive modes of transport to less carbon intensive, and then on to retailers and consumers, that's where a majority of the waste of fresh produce occurs in developed countries like the United States and in Europe. And Apeel is able to effectively reduce waste at retail as well as in the consumer's home. So just the idea that with more time, value can be realized all along the produce supply chain. And one interesting thing to note here is that Apeel has noticed that this idea of extra time drives value differently depending on the different produce category. So based on the way we optimize our products for different types of produce, we can help realize the value and realize and maximize the value for different ways for different types of produce. In order to get our product into the market, Apeel partners with a large network of produce suppliers. For a little bit of context, the Apeel product is manufactured as a powder here in Goleta, California, and is then shipped to different Apeel product application locations. So where we partner with these suppliers, we're in their packing houses, which is where the fruit is processed and boxed up after it comes off the farm. And the Apeel product shipped as a powder is then mixed with water, sprayed onto produce, and then lightly dried before it is repackaged and shipped off to retailers. So we have to work directly with the produce suppliers to ensure that we're at the facilities where the fruit is already being processed. And Apeel then partners with some pretty exciting large grocery retailers, both in the United States and Europe, enabled to sell our produce at retail. Back in September, we announced an international expansion with Kroger, the largest grocer in the United States, to expand our avocados to all 2,800 of their stores from coast to coast. In addition, we partner with a retailer called Edeka Germany, which you may not be quite so familiar with if you're based in the United States, but they're the largest grocer in Germany. So it's exciting to see Apeel being sold in stores in multiple different countries. And at the same time, Apeel also has developed some in-house tools to help measure produce quality to ensure that our product performance is delivering on what we promised. So you see here some avocados in a respiration chamber. Essentially, in this little box, we're measuring the amount of gas exchange across the avocado. I mentioned that avocados tend to go bad because they let in oxygen and release carbon dioxide at too quick of a rate. So if we're able to slow that down, slow the ripening phase, as you can see the results here, we're able to extend the shelf life. And again, just like the value is created differently depending on the produce category, so too we develop different produce quality tools in order to measure how our product is performing. You can see in the picture here, the Apeel limes retaining that green color, and then also helping maintain the moisture, so losing their mass, losing their water less quickly. In addition to measuring our product performance in-house, we also work closely with the grocery retailers in order to measure how our product is performing in the store. And it's exciting to see that there's real proof in the market that Apeel is creating value. Across our retail programs, we've seen a 50% plus reduction in shrink. So shrink is the industry term for waste at retail. So we've been able to see that effectively for our customers with our products in market, we're able to reduce the amount of waste happening in their stores, the amount of money they're wasting by having to put product into the trash. As well, we're also seeing that these retailers tend to observe a 5 to 10% sales growth. Consumers are excited to come into their store and buy Apeel produce that tends to be longer lasting. Now to kind of the more meat of the presentation, I hope why so many of you were excited to join today, which is how Apeel also is able to realize sustainability value for its customers. So these are what we like to advertise as what customers can gain from sustainability with Apeel. The idea that with reduced food waste, we can then use our in-house expertise in life cycle assessment to quantify the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, energy, water that results from our customers partnering with Apeel to extend the shelf life of their produce and reduce waste. So this will kind of be the focus of the remainder of the presentation today, how Apeel uses life cycle assessment to really holistically measure the environmental benefits of Apeel produce. So while Apeel does include its powder product in the LCA product system, we take a holistic approach in that we also include the produce that we apply our product onto in our product system. The idea that the Apeel produce is the product in question here. And this is just to observe the kind of greater system dynamics that happen with Apeel produce in the market. So now to familiarize you all with what our product system looks like, we essentially start with the produce supply chain as the backbone for our product system. Everything it takes to grow produce on a farm, store it in a post-harvest setting and distribution, then further processing and packaging of the produce until it's eventually distributed to retail and then purchased and consumed. So this is a very simplified view of kind of what the produce system would look like. And in addition, we then quantify all of the inputs, a couple of examples of which are listed up here that have to happen into each of these processes, and then the outputs that happen, whether it's emission, waste, as well as our eventual functional unit. Once we kind of have this produce system, this produce supply chain forming the backbone of our product system, we then, of course, incorporate all of the processes that are unique to the Apeel product. So you see the dashed line kind of forming the system boundary around what is specifically the Apeel product, what we're introducing into the system. So we account for everything that it takes to make the raw materials, manufacture the powder, distribute to our sites, and then apply it onto produce. And we come in here at this processing and packaging step. This is after the fruit has come off the farm and is aggregated at what we call a packing house, where it's put into boxes and sent to retail. The way we then perform the life cycle assessments, we essentially compare a baseline scenario where the Apeel product is not in market to a scenario with the Apeel product. And then not only is in a baseline scenario, not only is the Apeel product not there, but we also have a certain amount of produce we account for a certain amount of waste that happens with fresh produce at both in the retail setting and in the consumer home. So this 14% retail shrink is one example based on what we've seen from in-market data in avocados. And it's estimated that US consumers waste about 25% of fresh produce that ends up in their home. And in this case, our functional unit for this product system is 1 kilogram of produce consumed in US homes. I have 6 different types of produce up here. So avocados, cucumbers, mandarins, limes, apples, and asparagus. Since these are what we'll be seeing the results of in a couple of slides, these are Apeel's current products that are in market or near term to entering the market. So this is what our baseline scenario looks like. And again, we compare that to a product system with Apeel. So the same kind of backbone here, the produce supply chain, but then of course we add in the Apeel product, as well as we adjust those retail and consumer waste rates based on what we've seen with our in-market data. So we've been able to see, as I mentioned before, that we can reduce waste at retail by 50% or greater. So here we estimate that with Apeel, we would be able to reduce retail shrink from 14% to 7%. And based on our product performance data, we expect that consumers also see a 50% reduction in their waste. So going from 25% to 12.5%. So here we have, again, the same functional unit between these 2 different scenarios, but one is with Apeel and one without. Now just to kind of take a moment here, step back and from the Apeel product system specifically, but just to kind of conceptually walk through exactly how food waste reduction might result in environmental savings. It's not exactly the most intuitive one-to-one correlation. So bear with me as I just make sure we're all on the same page here. The idea is that we have on the far left here our functional unit. So 1 piece of fruit eaten in a household. However, because waste happens along the supply chain, that 1 piece of fruit eaten did not end up as 1 piece of fruit on the farm. Essentially, in order to account for the amount of waste that happens in the supply chain, you have to grow 1.55 pieces of fruit in order to then end up with 1 piece of fruit eaten if 14% is going to waste at retail and 25% is going to waste in a consumer's home. So then you also have to allocate all of the environmental impacts associated with growing that 1.55 pieces of fruit to the one that eventually gets eaten, which is how we end up with the environmental impacts associated with our functional unit. However, I think as I demonstrated earlier in this presentation, Apeel is able to effectively extend the shelf life of fresh produce, which then leads to a significant waste reduction at retail and in consumers' home. So we see this 50% waste reduction with Apeel, down to 7% and 12.5%. So the environmental savings really result from fewer inputs for the same functional unit. We have our 1 piece of fruit eaten in a consumer's home, but since these waste rates are lower, you only need to grow 1.23 pieces of fruit in order to end up with your functional unit. So then you only have to allocate all of the environmental impacts associated with growing the 1.23 pieces of fruit to the 1 eaten. So this is really kind of the way in which Apeel is able to compare a baseline and Apeel scenario and see the difference in environmental impacts that result from food waste reduction. One really exciting potential here, though, is that the reduction of food waste at retail and in consumers' homes is really only one way that Apeel is creating environmental savings. We're also noticing that depending on the produce category, there may be additional opportunities. For example, with apples tend to be picked and then stored for a relatively long amount of time before they're sent to retail stores. If Apeel is able to be applied before that long storage period, we can also reduce waste in that storage phase. In addition, I think I've talked about the exciting potential of the asparagus product here, but if we're able to shift the shipping from air freight to sea freight, there can be significant carbon emission reductions there. And again, as we saw in the video with the cucumbers, replacing that shrink wrap plastic can reduce reliance on single-use plastics in the food system. Before we dive into the exciting results that come from those environmental savings, I want to take a moment to highlight what it looks like to go about the data collection process for our foreground data for the system with Apeel. So here you see the product system, and I'm just going to highlight by step kind of the different teams we may work with to gather data. So highlighted here, we get a wealth of data back from the customers that we partner with and the retail customers that we partner with, and then we work very closely with our sales team to gather that data and the strategy team at Apeel to quantify what exactly the shrink rates are looking at, like for produce with and without Apeel. That allows us to do that effective comparison of what's the waste in a baseline scenario and what's the waste in an Apeel scenario. And as I mentioned before, we apply our product at different produce supplier sites, and we mix the powder product with water, spray it on, and then lightly dry it. So we work very closely with our engineering and our field operations teams in order to understand the input, in order to account for the inputs necessary for product application. So each system is going to be a little bit different depending on the produce type that we're applying our product onto. So we really need to work to make sure we understand what's going on at each site. We also work closely with our formulation sciences team. This is essentially our research and development team to quantify the inputs necessary to make the Apeel product, as well as identify potential new feedstocks to make our material out of, which could overall reduce the environmental impact of our product in time. And lastly, we also engage with our customers directly in order to get information on where they may be sourcing their produce from, mapping out where their farmers are located. Throughout the year and for different end markets, the locations in which produce can be grown can actually vary significantly, even for one specific type of produce. Just to visualize, looking specifically at the avocado diagram here, there can be multiple supply chains for just for avocados. Because of seasonality, the avocado season in Peru is very different than Chile and then Mexico and California. So a retailer that we're working with may be sourcing produce from many different locations depending on the time of year. So we work very closely with them to understand where they're sourcing their produce from during programs with Apeel. Now to take one moment to kind of highlight some of the nitty-gritty details of our LCA before we dive into the results, so we're all on the same page. We did utilize the EcoInvent v3.5 database for our background data. And of course, I just walked through a couple examples of what foreground data collection looks like within Apeel. For this study, we did use the Impact 2002 Plus LCIA methodology. However, in future studies you'll see from Apeel, you'll notice that we have since shifted the ILCD 2.0 midpoint methodology, and will continue to use water withdrawals based on the cumulative life cycle inventory to note how our product changes water use across the supply chain. And then lastly, our same functional unit here that I introduced before, which is 1 kilogram of Apeel produce consumed in US homes. And you can expect to see results on the coming couple slides here for these 6 different produce categories I've highlighted here. So to orient you to this graph, we're taking a look at the global warming potential impact category with our kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions on the y-axis and our different types of produce categories on the x-axis, with the Apeel produce being in the darker green and baseline in lighter green. Here you can really see the exciting potential with the asparagus product of shifting that mode of transport from air freight to sea freight. We really are able to drop the carbon emissions associated with asparagus. With the remaining categories, we still see consistent and exciting results of about a 19 to 21% impact reduction in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. Looking now, this takes a look at cumulative water withdrawals across the product system. This really highlights the different water intensity of different crops, in addition to showing the Apeel water use reduction. So something like asparagus, which has such a large carbon footprint, is actually not very water intensive crop to grow. Compared to avocados, which do require a high degree of water. But again, seeing consistent and exciting results here across different produce categories from avocados, limes, asparagus, and apples. And I should also note here in the little bottom note on the bottom of the screen, these Apeel LCA results, which are published on our website, were third-party reviewed in accordance with the ISO 1440 and 1444 standards. So we work with the third-party verifier to assure that the way in which we're measuring these results does agree with industry standards. Shifting now to a contribution analysis. So to orient you, we have different impact categories along the x-axis here, and this is specifically looking at Apeel avocados. You'll notice that a majority of the impacts do accrue during avocado production in the light green color, or in the yellow color here, which is that distribution from farm to packing house phase, where Apeel is applied at the packing house. And it's also exciting to see the Apeel specific processes are in red here, and they're a small line that you can see in some of the graphs. So we do keep track of the percent of the contribution analysis that we have to attribute to the Apeel product itself. And it is very exciting to see how small that is in terms of the other contributions throughout the product system. We do want to look into that a little more critically. We want to try and identify ways that in time we can reduce our own product's impact. And we want to make sure we're capturing as many of the potential environmental savings from food waste reduction as possible. So here's, we're going to walk you through this table here, just how we keep track of whether we're capturing the maximum amount of savings. We first start by looking at what would the total environmental savings be resulting from food waste reduction if the Apeel product had no impacts at all. But then, of course, we know that's not the case. We do actively measure the inputs necessary to make, distribute, and apply the Apeel product. So here we subtract them out from the total potential savings. Then we end up with the net environmental savings, where we do then keep track of what percent of the potential savings we're still capturing even after we account for the impacts from the Apeel product. And it's very exciting to see that we're close to 100% in the majority of the impact categories here. And this does fuel ongoing efforts to try and reduce our own product's impact, because we want to get these as close to 100% as possible. Just to give you a sense of what that looks like with Apeel, we do perform product hotspot analyses, which then inform our continuous improvement efforts. Here you can just see two impact categories, so the global warming impact category and cumulative water withdrawal. And you'll note the dark green color here is that product application step, where we, that's the produce supplier sites where we're mixing our product with water, spraying it on the produce, drying it, and then sending it back into the supply chain. So this has fueled kind of ongoing projects with our engineering and operations team to understand how can we operate our Apeel product application equipment in the most efficient way possible, but also how can we look towards the future and design equipment that's less resource intensive in the long term, so our product impact can slowly shrink with time. Shift gears a little bit here. If any of you on this webinar are LCA practitioners, you'll know how difficult it can be at times to explain all of the technical elements of a life cycle assessment to the average consumer. And that's something that's very relevant to Apeel. We're trying to be a consumer-facing brand and get customers excited by the positive environmental impacts they can be creating by purchasing Apeel produce in stores. So these next couple of slides show what our sustainability website looks like. So this was launched just in January of this past year, where we're really trying to start to put out resources to educate consumers on what the benefits could be with Apeel produce. So you'll see here that we're able to share things like every time a consumer chooses an Apeel avocado, they're saving 23 liters of water and enough energy to charge their smartphone 9 times. At the same time, we have this fun little tracker where we're keeping track of all of the avocados Apeel has saved by reducing waste at retail since introducing our product into the market for the first time in 2018. Very exciting to see that this is getting close to 4 million. I just took this screenshot last night, so I bet if you checked after this webinar, it would be even a little bit higher. And then lastly, we do share a suite of LCA results directly on our website. If you go to apeelsciences.com/sustainability, you will see a version of our LCA report, the same results that I just walked through, as well as some what we call product scorecards, where you're able to see on a per piece of fruit basis what the sustainability savings could be. So this is kind of our first attempt at trying to educate consumers and the general world about what the sustainability benefits are with Apeel. It's very exciting to start to see some of these results out in the general domain for the first time. But now for the remainder of our presentation, I do want to focus on kind of where our efforts are focused more recently from an LCA perspective, where we've noticed that Apeel customers are extremely excited by the sustainability metrics that we're able to provide based on the programs we have going with them. So the way Apeel tends to introduce new products into the market is we'll do a pilot program with a retailer. So for example, we just recently went through a pilot program where we kind of test the Apeel product in a few stores before that retailer signs up for a full expansion. We did that with Edeka as well as another retailer in the EU. And then we were able to provide sustainability metrics that were specific to that pilot program. So I do want to kind of take a moment to highlight how this is a little bit different than these the results published in our LCA report that we just walked through. Just on the idea that Apeel is kind of trying to innovate in the LCA space to use it as a tool for generating results specific to customers. So we just walked through all of these resources that we have available on the Apeel website. So these kind of static results from the LCA report that capture really the typical environmental performance you could expect to see with Apeel. But really the novel approach that Apeel is trying to take with generating more customer specific results is just quickening the turnaround time for LCA results while still holding true to methodologies that will result in results in accordance with the ISO standard, but really based on a specific customer's supply chain. As I kind of walked through earlier with the produce supply chain, there can be inputs that vary significantly depending on the unique dynamics of a customer's operations and supply chain. They could be sourcing avocados from many different regions. They could have very different modes of transportation. So while we have these results published on our website, they may not be exactly representative of a customer's supply chain, whereas they want to share truly exactly what is happening with in their operations with Apeel. So this necessitated a way for Apeel to kind of take a consistent calculation approach to every instance where we need to calculate customer-specific results, but then be able to adapt the different parameters and inputs we add into the methodology to fit each unique scenario. The idea that here we have all these disparate data points that could vary a lot depending on the produce category we're looking at, depending on the consumer, but how can we take that and find one harmonized way to then perform a life cycle assessment? So what we've landed on is essentially kind of this modular product system structure where if you'll note, we have our produce supply chain where we're able to pull in different elements that may be true in one system but not true in another, and then vary the input parameters based on that specific scenario. So I know it's a little esoteric to try and describe on a slide here, but essentially in our LCA modeling software, we have one page of variables, and the use of those variables is consistent no matter what produce category or customer we're looking at, but the value of them will vary with time. So we've been able to develop a methodology that can account for variability, but also produce results fairly quickly and consistently, such that we were able to generate really these scenario-specific LCA results for every one of our customers. And another exciting thing to note here is that Apeel did work with our third-party verifier to really assure that this customer-specific lifecycle assessment methodology has been reviewed and verified, and that it will produce results that are in conformance with the ISO 1444 and 1440 standards. Very exciting. This is something that not many companies try and do, and it was definitely an ambitious undertaking, but we're excited to kind of start to see some of the results used by our partners out in the market. And I do want to kind of walk you through an example here of what this looks like in the real world. I did share a couple slides ago, there was a little screen cap of a video that we had produced working with our avocado importer company in Europe, which partners with the retailers where we sell Apeel avocados. And they really wanted to use metrics in that video that were specific to their supply chain, specific to their customers' supply chains. So this example here is going to walk through kind of what it took to generate those results that are quite specific to that unique context. So we start with the same kind of product system structure as I introduced for the other LCA results here, where but we tailor those inputs and outputs and waste rates that are very specific to EU customer operations and their avocado supply chains. And then of course, we also make sure that the Apeel inputs are specific to the product application location. In this case, it's in the Netherlands, and we collect data from that site in order to ensure that the Apeel product impacts are represented in the most accurate way possible. Now to kind of dive in for a couple examples of what that looked like at each stage of the produce supply chain. In this case, the Apeel avocado supplier partner that we were working with was able to share their avocado sourcing data about where the avocados were coming from during the pilot program. They also then provided irrigation water data from their growers. So in this instance, we were able to actually adapt the avocado production process to be representative of the amount of water that their growers were using. We then, of course, incorporated the different transportation distances and modes from the sourcing region countries, typically in different parts of South America, into the EU, usually shipped by boat, which is very different than, say, the US avocado supply chain, where a majority are coming from Mexico and sent via truck. In this instance, the Apeel avocado supplier partner was also actually able to share waste management data with us about how much avocados were sent to compost, animal feed, additional processing markets upon import, just because they didn't quite meet those quality standards they look for in avocados sent to retail. So we're able to incorporate that into the model here. And then to take a quick moment to highlight kind of how we account for variability in Apeel product impacts across different application sites. So as I briefly mentioned before, the Apeel application equipment is really optimized depending on what different type of produce we're applying our product onto, as well as the even like unique layout of the packing house where we're integrating our equipment into. So we do need to essentially collect unique data from every site where Apeel is operating around the world. Because of that, we worked very closely with our engineering and operations teams, understanding what data did we have available and how could we most easily and efficiently measure the processes that we have going on at our application sites in order to collect data for our LCA models. We kind of so we were able to then optimize the way the LCA methodology pulls in data based on what's easiest for our sites to measure, yet still yielding quite accurate results. So finding creative ways to measure how much water we're using, how much natural gas we're using to then pull that into the model. So it's really this give and take between what data do we have available, how can we develop a methodology structure that can account for that. And of course, this close engagement with those teams has also forwarded ongoing projects where we're trying to always increase data visibility and accuracy. One big project I'm involved in right now is working on installing utility meters on all of our product application equipment, which will just take us to another level in terms of data visibility. These will even be smart meters where we'll be able to see in real time how much, what our resource use at our different sites are, really just kind of quickening even more that turnaround time of generating LCA results. And lastly, to kind of round out the supply chain here, we of course collected data from our retailer partners based on how much waste was happening in retail stores during the avocado pilot program. And that kind of then was able to finalize the results, which I'll again highlight on the next slide. The really exciting thing to note here, so again, these results are shown in terms of environmental impact reduction per load of avocados, which is about 20,000 kilograms sent from the avocado supplier to stores. And very exciting results to see here. And I do just want to highlight that the turnaround time for something like this is much more rapid than the traditional kind of structure with a lifecycle assessment where you'd collect the data, generate the results, get it third-party verified before publishing the report. Our turnaround time here was weeks rather than months, which is something that is proving really essential for Apeel and really exciting, something that our partners are excited to see. We were able to kind of generate these results, verify that they were done in accordance with the methodology that produces ISO standard results, then share them with our customers in order for them to then use in our communications. So very exciting to start to see some of the Apeel sustainability metrics out there in the world, not only on our own website, but also working with our partners to show them out in the world. That is the end of my official presentation here. Thank you all for joining in today. I'm happy to take additional questions that may have come up during the presentation. Thank you all.
And thank you, Shannon. What so overwhelming, so interesting all at one time. And I have a slew of questions from people. And let me start by saying I have a range of questions from people asking about all sorts of products, from can this work on nuts or greens like lettuce and spinach, or legumes or meats or flowers? Those are like 4 different questions combined there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can go ahead and take a stab at that. So I'll start with the flowers piece. Apeel actually very early on in its product development took a look at flowers and if that was a market we wanted to go into. Essentially, Apeel creates the most value for fresh produce because that respiration rate is so high and it degrades so quickly. That's really where we've identified the, where we can add the most value. It's really that, that's the function of the product. It's slowing that respiration rate. So things like beans may not, the shelf life is already so long that respiration rate is slow, where the, optimal product performance may not be quite the same. But yeah, that's really where we've seen the greatest benefit so far, which is why we're focusing on the fresh produce market.
Okay. Is it legal and has it been approved in Canada is one question.
That is a good question. I actually don't know off the top of my head, but whoever asked that, you can see on our website where you are able to purchase Apeel Produce, and I'm also happy to follow up afterward as well. Our regulatory affairs team does keep close track of where Apeel produce is approved for use. So why don't you go ahead and follow up with me afterward, and I can get you a more specific answer to that question.
Is it FDA approved?
It is, yes. It's FDA GRAS, so generally recognized as safe.
Okay. Is the change in individual produce lifetime used in the LCA, or is the shrink rate used as something as a proxy?
That's a good question. So we do use the shrink rate as somewhat of a proxy. We don't take into account any unique timeline. We really kind of take a look at the system, see how much waste is going on. So obviously, some produce does last longer than others, but the shrink is a fairly good proxy for us. So we really only do look at shrink rate.
And did you consider water scarcity or just the water withdrawals for the various crops?
That's a good question. So we're still looking at ways to incorporate water scarcity into our life cycle assessment. We, in some instances where we don't have specific farmer data, we do have to kind of rely on the industry average processes in the EcoInvent database, where the location of water use may not be exactly closely matched to where we source the avocados from. So that's something we're looking into for future studies, but at the moment we just are continuing to use cumulative water withdrawal.
And another water question is just curious as to why you plan to continue with water consumption instead of one of the water scarcity methods like the AWARE method.
Yeah, we definitely have been looking into the AWARE method a lot quite recently. Part of our, we are always looking for new ways to incorporate those types of methodologies into our LCAs. I think once we are able to get a little bit more granular data quality from the farmers that produce the Apeel produce, I think that's when we would start to look into using a water scarcity index.
Someone would like to know what the price difference is between a regular avocado versus an Apeel avocado.
That's a good question. I know pricing does tend to vary between different customers, but I think in many cases, the retailer charges the same price as a typical avocado because they're able to realize the economic savings just by reduced waste, so they don't have to charge more at retail.
Okay, let me see. Well, someone's asking about how the product is created with the natural cuticle layer and made into a powder. I don't know if that's proprietary or it's something. And is it all natural?
Yeah, that's unfortunately we can't share too many specifics about the Apeel powder production process that is IP protected. But essentially, the materials that are used to create Apeel are already found in all the fruits and vegetables that we already eat. And really, they're found in every plant on Earth. So Apeel is always looking for, different feedstocks that we can use to produce our product. But really, we have kind of a wealth of choices because we can really choose anything. The molecules already exist in plants everywhere.
Okay. Someone says, very interesting, Shannon. Do you have plans to measure actual consumer waste?
That's a very good question. That's definitely one of our biggest goals. In working into the future, especially since the environmental savings we could be enabling significantly increase if we're able to show that we're reducing waste at the consumer household level. We've started to kind of dabble in trying to collect some consumer data. If you go to our sustainability website, you'll see there's a little survey where you're able to choose from different pictures of avocados if you would or wouldn't eat it, depending on how too far along they look. And then that's one instance we're trying to kind of correlate consumer preference to specific shelf life of avocados. But that's definitely, a priority area of research for us, trying to understand what does it mean for consumers to have Apeel produce in their home? How is it impacting the amount of waste they throw away?
Okay, another LCA question. How are the data from the produce monitoring tools used in the LCA? Is the data integrated directly or will it be?
That's also a good question. So right now we rely on kind of the in-market data primarily for our life cycle assessment tool, just because while the produce quality tools are a very effective way of measuring product performance, there's not a one-to-one correlation between a perfect avocado and a consumer choosing to buy that avocado. There are so many factors at play in a grocery store that determine whether someone purchases an avocado or the same in their household, whether it goes to waste or not. So it's an important way of monitoring that we are continuing to have a good product performance. And in a couple instances, we have been able to correlate in instances of decay in apples, for example, to see could that be used as a proxy for waste. That's something we're continuing to test in-house. But at this time, we primarily do use that in-market data because it tends to be the most robust and kind of reliable data point for real-world results.
And how are you planning to spread Apeel to more partners and get your product to other grocery stores and retailers?
It's a good question. Our sales team is hard at work to try and always expand Apeel Produce into new markets across the US and Europe. It's really kind of an effort of matching the retailer demand with the supplier supply as well. So because of produce seasonality, it has to be produced in a variety of different regions. So for something like avocados for the European market, we need to, if we want to treat in the source countries, we have to install Apeel product application locations in a variety of different South American countries as well as in Mexico. So it's really kind of trying to optimize those supply chains. Where can we see kind of the maximum benefit for an installation we provide?
Okay. It's a funny question. Does the Apeel coating change the texture of the avocado, since avocado texture changes in a variety of ways?
Really, the peel is pretty invisible, and you really wouldn't notice it's there. It has a slight waxy feeling, but really you wouldn't notice it from an avocado in the store. So no, it doesn't change the texture so much.
So we don't even know whether we're having it or not. Is that it? Is that right?
Typically, Apeel, when it's in a store, does have its brand on there as well. So you'll see a little Apeel sticker or an Apeel flyer showing that Apeel is on there, but typically it would be indistinguishable, yes.
Okay. You mentioned that Apeel treats avocados upon import to the US and Europe. Does Apeel have plans to treat produce in the country of origin to reduce waste along the supply chain?
It's also a good question. I think I spoke to this briefly, just the idea that because we treat it, so we choose to treat at import because then we can aggregate supply from multiple different countries at one facility. So that really kind of reduces the upfront cost of installing in many different countries. So just for context, at our Netherlands facility, we treat avocados from up to 5 to 7 different countries. Whereas if we did want to treat at source and reduce waste along the supply chain, we'd have to have Apeel installations at all of those different countries, which is, we want to try and see how we can maximize the benefits with the minimum number of installations. But we have, for US markets where a majority of avocados come from Mexico, started to integrate at source there. So we do have a couple installations that are happening in Mexico in order to see how can we reduce waste along the supply chain between Mexico and the United States.
And someone would like to know whether you plan to ever consider selling the Apeel product directly to consumers so they can treat their own produce at home.
That's a good question. That's definitely something we've been asked many times before. I definitely would love to have it in my kitchen. I buy some strawberries from the store and I can just dip them in Apeel and have longer lasting produce. But it's for right now, we continue to kind of want to keep it in-house for IP reasons and also to optimize product performance. It does take a lot to get that perfect coating on produce and really help maximize shelf life extension. But we're always looking for ways that we can kind of deliver the maximum value to consumers as well.
And you touched on this during your presentation, but maybe you could elaborate a tiny bit. How are you able to quickly execute the data collection process for the customer-specific results? It seems like you have a lot of variables to track down in a short amount of time.
Yeah, we definitely do have a lot of variability that we're trying to account for with that methodology. I think a lot of the work for the Apeel product specifically can be done upfront. You know, we're always trying to improve data collection efforts and understand how our equipment is operating. So when it comes time for a customer wanting specific results, we have a deep understanding of what the inputs are for the Apeel product specifically. And then a lot of the data that is necessary for the customer-specific LCA does have to come from the customer themselves. So it's kind of a give and take of they want the results, we want to generate them, so working together to gather the data. But then in some instances, when we kind of set out the plan for a program with Apeel with the retailer, they do provide some important data up front, such as which stores will be carrying Apeel, so we can calculate the transportation distances. So essentially, a lot of it is trying to do as much of the work up front ahead of time, so that when it comes time to generate the results, we're able to quickly execute.
Wonderful. Well, I think I'm going to be closing this webinar. We've had such a wonderful time with you today, and I want to thank you so much for this very interesting new product that you're putting out there. And I also wanted to invite our listeners to next month's Brown Bag webinar about reconciling values and facts in comparative LCA. So thanks again, Shannon, and I'm going to end this webinar.
All right. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, everyone.